Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings and welcome to another week here on Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Dace alongside my co-host and absolutely never partner, Aaron McIntyre, as we head into the final week of October already, Aaron. And the Big Ten race right now, 4 teams have clearly separated from everybody else. One of them, we'll talk about in a minute, though, has a key injury that maybe threatens to maybe at least threaten some of their dreams anyway. But there's clearly 4 teams, Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. And then there's kind of everybody else on a given weekend. Are you playing on the road? Who are you playing? That kind of all seem to be in the same bucket. But what do you read so far as we head almost to November?
Basically the same thing, and we had kind of an inkling that this was going to be the case. You know, if you're 2 losses, it could change from year to year depending on how much parity there is in the league. But this particular league, if you got to the middle of October and you've got 2 losses or more losses in league play, you kind of thought with what we thought Ohio State's, we did think Michigan, Oregon, and Penn State brought you to the table. You're kind of out of it. There's a lot of teams, 14 teams here that are basically kind of playing for what? I don't know. I don't know. I guess we'll find out as the stories and games unfold. But yeah, that's kind of how we figured things would be. If you're not in this, if you've got more than 1 loss in league play by this time of the year, you're probably basically done.
Right. I think, going into the year, you're right. I mean, everybody thought there were 4 teams ahead of everybody else. They just thought Michigan was the 4th team and not Indiana. And so let's start there with the Hoosiers now. 7-0. It's the first time they've won this many games in a regular season before November. Or actually, they've never done it before November. And the first time they've won this many games in a regular season before the final 2 weeks of the regular season since the Rose Bowl team in 1967. You can Google that, too. Just like you can Google that Curt Cignetti definitely does win. However, the Hoosiers won a big battle. Big Noon Saturday was there last weekend. They absolutely destroyed Nebraska. And if I'm a Husker fan, I got to ask myself, so Matt Rule's had 2 years to build this roster, and we had 4 consecutive top 25 recruiting classes, and we have a 5-star quarterback. Cignetti comes in with 27 transfers, a lot of them from the group of 5, and where he coached at James Madison. His quarterback is from the MAC and was coming off a knee injury the year before. And we lost 56-7. That's a yo. So we'll talk about the Husker angle to this in a moment. But what a massive statement that was by Indiana. However, they won that battle here, and they may have lost the war. That aforementioned Curtis Work, he's got a thumb injury, banged it on a helmet during the game. They're saying he will return this year. He's out indefinitely. I will tell you, in the NFL, we just had a starting quarterback go down with a similar injury. They're saying he's out probably 4 to 6 weeks. So, that would put him almost to the end of the regular season, if not the postseason. So, I mean, if you're an Indiana fan, now you got game day coming in on a Saturday for the first time ever. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking to yourself, man, this finally, and then that happens. But nevertheless, what an incredible season that continues on for the Hoosiers.
Well, in fairness to Nebraska, and again, we'll talk about them in a little bit, I think most of the teams in this league, save for maybe 3 or 4 others, are probably asking the same thing about themselves and Indiana at the moment.
Right.
But yeah, it was just a spectacle. It was an incredible display. And you thought going into that game, okay, this is finally going to be Indiana's first real big boy test. And then 56-7. And you're thinking, there's no more excuses now. Okay. I've been through this as an Iowa fan. In 2015, we were the fake ID of college football. Maybe you had a favorable schedule, and Indiana has had a favorable schedule. But it is nauseating to see so many excuses. You can say the same thing about our in-state school. It's not a Big Ten school, but it's Iowa State as well. So many excuses to try to downplay what they're accomplishing. So if you're a Hoosier fan, enjoy the ride. Drink all that hatred up, because unless you do this again next year, which you very well might be able to do. I don't know what your schedule is next year, but if Curt Cignetti can pull off this type of win or this trend in year 1, there's no reason to think that he's not going to be one of the top coaches and you're one of the top teams in the league next year. Just enjoy it for what it is at the moment, because not many of these types of special seasons come around if you're a program like Indiana. And you hope that Cignetti is the type of guy that can make this less of a special season and more of an expectation there. And that certainly seems to be the case that he's made. But just enjoy the ride while you have it, because there's going to be a number of figures, both in national media, really just in the national media, who's going to try to downplay this as much as they possibly can to fit the narrative that they want to have.
Not to mention every big name program in the country with a coaching job is coming after him full barrel, obviously. But Indiana is one of only, 2 or 3 teams this year that has not trailed at any point this season?
I think it's down to, is it just down to 2 now?
Yeah, I think
it's them
is.
and like Army or something.
So, I mean, this is legit. This isn't a charmed life or, we put it all together and we're this plucky group. They are freaking a wagon. They are just steamrolling people. So, we'll see what they do this week, with game day there and no Curtis Rourke. From a handicapping perspective, teams typically rally pretty strong after they lose a star player. It's the ensuing weeks when the reality of that personnel loss kind of accrues. So we shall see. Let's talk about the Huskers side of this now. And I mentioned it a minute ago, and I like Matt Rule, and I thought he was a terrific hire. But if I were a Husker fan, I would be asking myself, you've had one more offseason to build a roster than Curt Cignetti did. You inherited a team that had 4 consecutive top 25 recruiting classes. You have a 5-star quarterback. I get, that's a tough environment on the road for a young kid. Fine, but 56-7.
Yeah, I mean, I would have
56-7.
Here's a question that I'm sure I'm going to get death threats from Husker Nation. I'm just kidding. Would you have rather, if you were a Husker fan, won in one of the classic Nebraska, lose by 1 score, figure out a way to lose the game, or lost 56-7?
That's a great question. And you're right. People will probably want to kill you for asking that. Nebraska is now 0-26, Aaron, against ranked teams since 2016. And I know that you were kind of coming of age as a football fan, kind of at the tail end of their dominant era, right? 2000.
Yep. Earliest I remember, I think, is Callahan.
Yep, 2000. So you don't even remember in 2001 when they played Miami for the national championship, for example. And Eric Crouch, you don't remember those guys? Okay. So then you don't know what this used to be like. But for those of us that are old enough to remember, Gen Xers, Boomers, you hopped into DeLorean and go talk to your 1995 self when Tommy Frazier just scored against Florida again in the national championship game, and say, hey man, we're gonna go. How about Nebraska doesn't beat a ranked team? Forget doesn't win a natty since in 8 years, doesn't beat a ranked team in 8 years. That absolutely blows my mind.
Do you give any credence to the notion that the teams of the Big Ten West were hampered by the Big Ten West? That there really wasn't a whole lot of competition or parity? I mean, there was, but it was at a lower level. There was parity, but it was at a much lower level than the rest of the league. And so now that they're coming into the kind of this new era, this new league, they're not really prepared. They just have lower expectations for their opponents than what they had in years past. Oh, you mean in the old divisional
format, 21 points won most games?
Correct.
There's maybe something to that. I mean, we had the West never won a Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis once we went to that divisional alignment, and a lot of those games were absolute blowouts. I mean, the last 3 years my team's played in it, and name the score against Iowa twice. And then in the second half, just, blew Purdue completely off the field like they didn't belong. So, yeah, there could be something to that. Sure.
Yeah, but going back to Nebraska and what they're saying, I think that's why Matt Rule got that unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. I think he was screaming at Curt Cignetti, "Hey, you're in year 1. How are you doing this to me right now?" That's probably what
I tried Googling it. It didn't give me the answer.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know. There's some things that you can chalk up to. It's an oblong ball, and there's 22 players on the field. That's a lot of players on the field at a time. There are other things where it's just cursed. And I don't know what happened to Nebraska, but it certainly seems cursed right now.
Listen, I mean, Dylan Raiola is only going to get better, right? Okay. But the problem you have looking ahead to next year is you've got several pros on that defense that are all gone. That defensive coordinator, Tony White, who, by the way, looked like Tony Wrong against Kurt Cignetti's offense. But that guy's been phenomenal at Nebraska. I could see him being gone either to the NFL or a head coach somewhere next year. So as a Nebraska fan, you're not even used to this conversation where things got to line up, for it to work out. You grew up in an era where they worked out and then they lined up. Not that they had to line up to work out, right? Mm-hmm. Because we could be sitting here a year from now and be like, man, Dylan Raiola's really developed, but now the defense can't stop anybody, Let's talk about a team that doesn't have either one of those problems right now. The Oregon Ducks, #1 in the country. It's, I think, the first time in about a decade or so that we have had 4 different teams ranked #1 before we even get to November. Oregon #1 for the first time since 2012. And you look at their schedule the rest of the way, and where's the loss there, do you think? I don't see it. I mean, they have to go play in Ann Arbor in 2 weeks, but I think Michigan's just a dead man walking. So, they might be looking at running the table their very first year in the league, Aaron.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I thought versus Purdue, they looked like they were kind of hungover. They looked like they were playing 2 time zones away. And yet, they're just so good, and Purdue, I think, is just so bad. They still won 35-0, Mm-hmm. So I don't know. They've got Illinois. I still don't think Illinois. I mean, they're good. Illinois is good. Don't take anything away from that. But this is still the same Illinois team that gave up, 40, almost 50 points to Purdue the other week. Michigan is not good. Maryland, not great, and Maryland has to go 3 time zones away. Wisconsin, maybe an upset pick there if you want to get crazy.
And that is on the road, if I remember right.
That is
correctly.
on the road, yeah, in Madison.
Yeah. So that could be it.
And then Washington, which that's going to be a good game, in a year or a couple of years. But I think this year Oregon should be able to handle it. It is a rivalry game. Don't take anything away from that.
And Oregon's got some revenge because Washington cost them last year.
Correct.
They played twice, and Washington beat them both times. And that's why Michigan played Washington in the playoff instead of Oregon, basically.
So other than a couple of maybes, I don't see an obvious L on this schedule.
I don't either.
Or anything close to it.
I don't either. Let's talk about another one of the West Coast teams that came into the league this year, and that's USC. They're like Michigan's, their season is over too, but under different conditions. I mean, they're now 3-4, all 4 losses, Aaron, by a combined 14 points.
Mm-hmm. They're 14 points away from being 7-0.
Yeah, Lincoln Riley has become Scott Frost. I mean, they are inventing ways to lose. They were a preseason top 10 team last year, finished unranked with 5 losses. And now if I'm a USC fan, if I'm in the USC administration, I'm asking myself, what do we buy here, right? I mean, what are we doing here with this?
Yeah, if you can't get this done with Lincoln Riley, who are you going to get it done with? I mean, that's kind of what you were based on the expectations when you brought him in. So,
yeah.
I think you're unlike Michigan. I still think just because of the state of the defense, and I do think they're playing a little bit better this year than they were, well, quite a bit better this year than they were last year. I still think you got to give it some more time. But, again, like with Nebraska, it's interesting. We're kind of having some of the same conversations the past couple of years with USC as we are with Nebraska. It's just kind of a shrug. Like, I don't know. I don't know where you go from here if you're USC. I watched, a good portion of that game, and much like the games previously, you should have beat Michigan. You really should have if you're USC. Mm-hmm. You should have beat Maryland. You were up by multiple scores in that game late
Aaron,
in that game.
Aaron, they've been up in the fourth quarter of all 4 of these losses.
All of these games, but especially this one where you've got a team like Maryland on the ropes. You should be able to handle them pretty easily. You would think so anyway. I mean, but no, they couldn't figure out a way to get it done again. So they are the Western Nebraska.
Well, let's get to Michigan since they've come up here a couple of times, and what a difference a year makes. So Michigan and Michigan State played last year, prime time in East Lansing. Michigan won 49-0, Aaron, and if you remember the game, it wasn't that close. I mean, Michigan is running. I mean, there's only so many guys when you're on a travel party. They emptied the bench to avoid scoring 50. Now they're playing prime time again, this time in Ann Arbor. Both schools have first-year head coaches. Michigan is barely over a field goal favorite, and both teams are 4-3. And I would like to get your view from the outside. Because I absolutely believe if Sharon Moore loses this game Saturday night, it is less than 50-50 he will get a year 2. I absolutely believe that. And I walked through on Michigan podcast here on the channel earlier this week why that's the case. But what say you? I'll get your viewpoint, give you the last word.
Well, if they lose, it should be 50-50 or even worse odds that he even makes it to the end of this year. I think if you're Michigan, I kept earlier on in the season, I kept trying to hang my hat on your defense, and teams are you're just getting out coached. It's not like it's a bad defense, like player to player. It's, you've got some really good pieces, but it's just very poorly coached. I mean, the punt fake, that's just an indication of you aren't alert. You're just not really on the ball there. And that's an indication of poor coaching. So when you have poor coaching, you have a poor situation at quarterback, that equates to a really poor team. And it seems weird because, like you said, you've said this multiple times. I think Pro Football Focus or whatever draft outlook you're looking at has a lot of your guys, a lot of the defensive players going into the draft. This should not be the case when it comes to Michigan. So I've kept hanging my hat on that defense. At least it could keep you in games. Well, you need an offense to keep you in the game as well. And it's clear you don't have that either. I'd say the one thing, if you learn from Iowa last week, try as hard as you possibly can. If you can win on first down, you're going to have a chance against Michigan State. Michigan State came out with a really, really good game plan, but just completely, every single drive, every single series, 5, 6 yards on first down, 3, 4, 5 yards on first down, over and over again. I'm still not this year, a believer that Aiden Childs can put together 2 complete games 2 times in a row because he's just so young and so fresh still. So I think that's kind of the X factor that could keep Michigan in the game. But other than that, Michigan State coming off of a big win at home, and now you're going on the road in a rivalry game. You still have really nothing to lose and everything to gain. Everything this year so far, every win for Jonathan Smith is going to be gravy this year. So I guess I don't know what to do. I'm trying to grasp at straws for optimism for Michigan.
Me too, man.
But
I don't see any.
I'm really struggling.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, let's come back after the break. We'll play Would You Rather here in a moment. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. And so this week, Joel Klatt over at Fox Sports did a podcast talking about the situations at both USC and Michigan, 2 of the brands his network is paying the most money for right now, and which ones have the biggest short-term and long-term problems. So along those lines, let me ask you this. Would you rather be Lincoln Riley or Sharon Moore right now?
This might be one of the harder would you rather propositions we've had in a while. And I know this is going to sound odd being that Sharon Moore's team beat USC and Lincoln Riley, but I would rather be Lincoln Riley right now because at least you can say, hey, we've had some improvement in the defense. We're really close. We're 14 points away from being 7-0. Whereas with Sharon Moore, the losses, no track record. The losses have just been, it's not been like they've been in massive blowouts, but they might as well have been, given the style of play that they've tried to adapt to. And the losses have just looked bad. They've just looked poorly coached. There's rays of light when it comes to Lincoln Riley, even though their season is over. I don't see that much right now with Sharon Moore. So I would still rather be Lincoln Riley, although I'd rather be neither right now. First one is for you. This should look familiar. Would you rather bet Indiana or Penn State to make the Big Ten championship game?
This is a closer bet than I think people realize. Because
I asked you the same thing last week.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Indiana, here's what's changed. I said Penn State unequivocally last week. But now Indiana doesn't have its starting quarterback. And so now it's pretty even. Okay. I think Indiana could lose a game or 2 without Curtis Rourke that it otherwise would not. But Penn State now has to play Ohio State still. So I'll still say Penn State. But As you can see, I am hedging on that question way more than I was a week ago. Clever of you to recycle that. That was smart.
Last week, you acted like it was an insult to your intelligence.
I did. Now that I've forgotten about it, but you're right. I did. Now that I remember that. Yeah. So way to throw it right back in my face. Hoosier Nation says, who's your daddy? And they're right. All right. For you, would you rather bet Illinois money line on the road at #1 Oregon, or unranked, who's Illinois ranked, by the way, or unranked Wisconsin money line at home versus #3 Penn State? Which bet would you rather make?
So I think I have overlooked Wisconsin too much this season, because it's clear that they have found something that's worked and been repeatable the last 3-4 games. Illinois I still have questions about. I'm still a little bit haunted by the fact that Purdue versus Wisconsin looked like one of the most hapless Big Ten teams, perhaps the most hapless Big Ten team that I've ever seen. And then they turn around and nearly score 50 in a loss at Illinois. So that's still kind of in the back of my mind when it comes to Illinois. When it comes to Wisconsin, their trajectory is headed up. And it seems like right now, despite the air raid, it seems like they have more of a style of play that could keep them in the game against Penn State. Plus, it is at home. So I'd rather go with Wisconsin, this matchup.
Okay.
This one for you, finally. Would you rather bet Rutgers plus 14 on the road at USC, or Washington plus 6.5 on the road at Indiana? Rutgers going 3 time zones away, playing at 11 p.m. on a Friday night local time. Washington going 2 time zones away. I believe Indiana is still in Central Time. Playing at Indiana, I believe that's at noon Eastern Time.
I'd rather bet Rutgers. I just, there's a theory in sports handicapping called the Dream Crusher, and that's why I was on Maryland last week. And USC has suffered that. And I don't expect much of any crowd at the Coliseum on a Friday night in LA to watch a 3-4 football team take on Rutgers. I do think Rutgers will at least play a competent game. I think there's less variance in that outcome than the Washington-Indiana game. I think the Washington-Indiana game, could go 3 out of 4 ways. I think Washington could win straight up because Curtis Rourke isn't there. I think Indiana could blow them out. And I think Indiana and Washington could play a really close game that Indiana pulls out at the end. I think Schiano, and it's going to be much easier for Greg Schiano, I think, to get his team back up off the mat after a couple losses in a row in games they thought they should have won than USC. Just getting to a bowl game is still a great reward for Rutgers. All of USC's season goals are now gone. I mean, at this point, you might have just lost to LSU. What does it matter at the beginning? If anything, that just made it more painful that you beat LSU, who's in the top 10 right now, and then ended up suffering this fate. So I just trust. The one thing of those 4 teams I can trust the most is Greg Schiano and getting his team's psyche to at least play hard. And I just don't know what USC has done to deserve laying double digits over a competent team in our league. I just don't, let alone 2 full touchdowns.
Yeah. I think that line is multiple time zones and multiple time zones alone. If you were setting the line, if I were setting the line, it would be like 4.5 to 6.5, something like that.
Yeah, I could see 7, even 8 maybe, but no more than, I wouldn't make it beyond 1 score for sure. Yeah. All right, we'll come back, and when we do, we'll wrap things up. This week's X-Poll results halfway through the season. How many Big Ten teams do you think are going to make it to the college football playoff? And overwhelmingly, you guys think it's just going to be 3 by a 3 out of 4 margin. So the 3, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State. The 4th, really, there's only 4 teams. Indiana would be that 4th team. And, of course, the Big Ten and the SEC are arguing for the future playoff after 26 to get 4 guaranteed spots. So what do you think of those poll results, Aaron? You agree, disagree, want to take issue with anything?
I think there's a possibility if both Indiana and Penn State end up with 1 loss, they could both make it. But I think there's going to be so much pressure to discount and to denigrate Indiana's record one way or another that it's much more likely still at this point, even with a 1-loss Indiana, that there's only going to be 2 1-loss teams with Penn State and Indiana, that there's only going to be 3 Big Ten teams to make it.
Okay. That brings us to our feedback of the week. Donnie thinks that Iowa has too many white DBs. I don't know, man. You guys have won a lot of games with guys like Riley Leonard
Moss.
and
Riley Moss,
I should say. Riley Leonard's another kind of athlete. Cooper DeJean, yeah.
Yeah, Mr.
I mean, I don't know that that's the issue.
Yeah. Our issue is bad DBs, not white DBs. Because all three of our starting DBs the other night were black. And then the backup was also black. And then the third string was white. And then the fourth string was white. Cooper DeJean,
just a little outside.
Cooper DeJean is a rookie who starts for the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Pretty good.
Riley Moss, I believe, starts for the Denver Broncos. Don't know if you've heard of them.
Yep.
He just had an interception a couple weeks ago, starting for the Broncos. So don't know if you've heard of those teams, those guys. Those are both white. So it's not that they have too many white DBs. It's that their second string or their second defensive back position is just bad right now. So other than that, really good take.
All right. Sounds good. You can like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, or more. Do all those things for us here, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on iTunes, or elsewhere. When you do all those things, it really helps us to find more Big Ten football sports fans just like you. Don't forget to follow us on X at Bigger10 in between episodes as well, at Bigger10 there. Until the next time, right here on Bigger10, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you then.